How is our ATP going? I think 2 hours have gone. So you've produced about 750 kilos. I turned it over. And the free radicals, as well as some of the excess phosphorus in your body, is going into your intestine as well as your bladder. And hopefully you can make it to 5. My name's Arno Rosemarin. I'm a senior research fellow at the Stockholm Environment Institute. And so my job right now is to actually take you up into space again after that fantastic visit in Florida. Trying to lift, in fact, phosphorus into the circular economy. Circular economy is a high priority for the EU. It encompasses actually 3 areas of activities. It's the 3 things that humans do most. That's eat, we grow food, that's one. The other is we build buildings and other kinds of infrastructure. And the third one is we're mobile. So those 3 things are being attacked today because they produce lots of waste. And waste is not considered a resource. Not enough anyway. Phosphorus is a victim of that. Fertilizer. So it's really a governance challenge in many, many ways. This diagram here on the other side, I'm going to be talking about it a little bit later, but it's actually a bit of a dream, but it does actually occur in some parts of the world already, where people are living in harmony between what they eat and what they excrete and how they grow food. And then there's these little chickens here that each one of them is indicating what the job is to be done, like the kitchen, the toilet, the collection. So anyway, we'll go back to that once we resolve some of these questions. So Greg was talking about the hockey sticks. Yeah, well, this hockey stick is probably the one that is least known. It's certainly not discussed at the meetings about climate change. This is a huge driver of carbon change and carbon flows. And it sort of like summarizes a little bit of what we've been talking about today with the role of manure in feeding populations through time, the role of guano, which, if you like, is a Technosphere product. It was a need for concentrated phosphorus in order to grow food for our burgeoning cities through the 1800s and what have you. And then, of course, the Green Revolution, which was actually driven by ammonia being produced from Haber-Bosch, thanks to that. But this is the secret to what made food go. It wasn't just nitrogen and potassium, it's also phosphate. Now, the interesting thing is, okay, we're up at 7 billion plus here. This red thing, I mean, this is the reason why we have 7 billion people on the planet. But it's also it's an insult to the circular economy and the let's say the idea of eco-cycles, in that most of this stuff is not being reused. Manure has a tradition of being managed and reused in a farming situation, but this is industrial. This is the Technosphere. This is essentially waste. It's going into food, and the food is, some of it's in the soil, but our view on this is that we use it and we throw it away. And the indicator here is how inefficient we are with this resource. So if you look at the black line, it's the relative amount of phosphorus as we go from mining to processing it to fertilizer to using it to grow crops to the actual amount we consume. It's about 20%, 80% lost. And the losses are around 20% for the mining industry. The fertilizer industry is more efficient. Losses there about 5 to 8%. Farmers really don't use it very well, and when we bring it into food, we throw away a lot of food. That's the stuff that we're actually putting into our intestines. So for the EU is a little bit better, but the average world is about 20%. That's a serious problem if it's a limiting resource. We're doing it wrong. And And you heard from Lino about this interesting thing, which came to be just 5 years ago. It was a reshuffling of the data to give Morocco a monopoly. And so at the present situation, they aren't the largest producer. They're the third largest producer after the US and China. But we are looking at a future of Moroccan-controlled phosphate. And there are many other actors, of course, and some of these will or will not partake in cartels, but they will never be able to compete with this single source. That's the world for the next 100 years. Now, how about the governance about this data, though? I mean, I just showed you that Morocco has 75% of the global resources, but if you look at the history on this data, it's actually pretty funny. Look, in 2010, it went up, it went from 6 gigatons to 50 gigatons. China, when they joined the World Trade Organization, they said, well, I think we have the same amount as Morocco, so a little bit more, but 6, 5, 7. And then after the market sort of was looking at China and said, is that really true? And they sort of dropped to half. Iraq got in and said, we've got the same amount as Morocco. Whoops, no, we don't. And then Algeria has not been proven wrong yet, so they're stuck at 3. These are huge geological discoveries. These are things to the equivalent of discovering a new planet when it comes to minerals. You don't find this amount of rock. You create it through reinterpretations of geological information. There's governance at play. And the interesting thing that no one's actually talking about is the US that, in fact, is going down. It peaked even before this curve, way back in 1980. So peak phosphorus has occurred in the US. It will occur in China. They're using way too much than they really should. And so their mines will be depleted, the commercial resource will be depleted in about 30 to 40 years, the same with the US. And we'll be stuck with a monopoly situation, assuming that data is correct. So there is no dialogue on it. The UN does not monitor the data. There's no third party. This is strictly speaking an estimate by a single party, the mining industry. Now the interesting thing is about the price of rock phosphate. So it was affected by the oil price during the oil crisis, as you recall. I know some of you may not have been alive then, but that was the first time that we realized that oil could actually change your lifestyle. That changed the whole world after that. But phosphate actually didn't really, it's a peak then, and it went on along very quietly until oil went up to $140 a barrel, and we had an increase of 800% in a few months, partially caused by the sulfuric acid prices. It's running at about $120 a ton right now. And there's people that say that the market never really has stabilized since 2008. It's kind of like disrupted. It's scarcity priced. That's the first sign of, if you like, disruption to this economy. And talking about disruption, so there's a place called the Inter-University Center for Terrorism Studies, and it is in the US. And they've been monitoring terrorist attacks in the Maghreb. The Maghreb is that, and the Sahel around it, since 9/11. And it sort of goes down and up. And of course, that's only part of we haven't taken the other parts where, the Syrian or the other Middle East countries are not on this map here. Morocco's had a few attacks as well. Just to say that if the world really depends on these 3 mines here and the one down here, we should really know much more about what makes this country and its neighbors work. We can't just sort of say, well, you know, they're terrorists or something like that. Oh, just go in and lock them up. We need to come to terms with this huge source that's actually going to be controlling our food security for the rest of our lives and the next generation as well. That's a challenge for governance. The EU, after about 2 years of lobbying, we managed to get the EU to put phosphate rock into this square. This square is a declaration by DG Enterprise, that's the EU's Department for Industry, that these substances are at risk. Most of these are rare earths, other things like that. Nothing has to do with energy, nothing has to do with food, but this one does, phosphate rock. So it's a bit of a breakthrough. It's a signal that the supplies can and will be disrupted at some time. The recycling is absolutely necessary and there's no substitutes. So that's basically, I would say, the only positive thing that's come out in the governance debate, that EU is actually taking this thing on. And speaking about our new vulnerability then, the fact is that we're dependent on a finite commercial sedimentary P-rock that is not being renewed fast enough. It'll take hundreds of millions of years to get this rock back. We're extracting it at rate increases of 6% a year. By 2050, we'll need to feed 9 billion, but they're changing their diets. They're eating meat. We don't have 9 billion as they were in 2009. The impact is we'll be feeding the equivalent of 11.5 billion people using a 2009 diet. That's interesting. So the amount of phosphate that these people are consuming is going to be much more than they would have in 2009. Today we have 1 billion malnourished. How many billion will it be in 2050? That's a very difficult world when you have 2 or even more than 2 billion that are not getting food. And right now, fertilizer is not available for many poor countries. It's too expensive. So that's not a very good report card. And the other one is now let's broaden things out and look at what humans really depend on to be healthy. And it's not just food, but hygiene and sanitation, water. That's going down now. It used to be about 5,000 kids per day that were dying due to dirty water and lack of sanitation. That's also going down a little bit, 6,000 additional mortalities due to malnutrition. But this is the interesting one, is the last chapter in human development. That's sanitation. That's the taboo topic that no one wants to talk about. This actually may end up killing us before anything else does, because we don't want to talk about this. It's 2.6 billion, according to the UN, that don't have toilets. It's 4.1 billion that have dysfunctional sanitation systems. That means they are not treating properly the stuff that's coming out. And certainly they do not really have any idea about what is in the material that's coming into our sewage treatment systems. So as a result, we have like a disease burden. We have something between 1 and 2 billion people that have worms, different kinds of helminth worms. The almost billion that are malnourished. We have in 50 countries people eating food that's irrigated with untreated sewage. We have a world where Sub-Saharan Africa doesn't get enough fertilizer. It's about 8 kilos a hectare, while the average in the world is 20, and it costs too much. It's about 5 to 6 times in the poorest parts of those northern African countries, the Sub-Saharan African countries, than in the US or Europe. That's a bad report card. How can we pull those things together? That's the question. And one of the things that you can do is you can do an experiment. You can take 1 day of your urine, and you can actually grow a kilo of carbohydrate, fresh weight. So that's 1.75 liters of urine. That's sort of like spread as you water it over the 3.25 months. If you take half of that or a third of that, you only get about a half a kilo. And if you don't use any urine, that's the way it is. That's an experiment in Zimbabwe in a typical red soil, which is, if you collect all your urine from a year, you can grow food of this kind over 300 square meters. So we're quite ignorant about that capacity that we have. And see. So the numbers are interesting. You know, per person, if you like, in a typical African situation, it's about 10 kilos of fertilizer that's going through your body. But most of the stuff, we're just throwing it away, basically because sanitation that's a dirty thing, and we don't think it's you know, what nature does. Nature can do, but humans are not supposed to do that. So that's why we have this diagram here. This is a something that actually existed a few thousand years ago in most Chinese villages. They're living in balance. I would say the cultural aspects of this make East Asia the place to be, you know, anywhere from the 1900s and back. But because of urbanization, this capacity is broken. It's busted. And in fact, with water-based systems, we're not being able to do this. So this, in fact, is a hypothetical for most of the world. Yeah, ecological sanitation is a crossroads challenge for humanity. If we don't do this, we won't be able to survive on this planet. And it's a spaceship. It's a closed system. That we haven't realized that either. So it's a little message for the future, and we've been putting this out, trying to get people interested in this for many years. For those of you that live here, Braunschweig is a great example. For 35 years, it's been showing that you can actually do this. It's a ultra-modern sewage treatment system that recycles everything. It was built for irrigation purposes. The sludge gets reused. There's biogas. There's electricity being formed. It can be done, even with the so-called, the most modern systems that we have. But we're doing things wrong when it comes to agriculture. We're keeping animals. We're creating a huge amount of phosphorus loss, as I showed before. So here's a picture of the density of animals relating to affecting the phosphorus runoff. And you can see that all these important factors here are necessary if we're going to manage phosphorus runoff properly. That's a big challenge. That's a change in the technosphere of agriculture. We have to sort of see what the land can do, and not just sort of like insult our drainage areas, as you saw in the Florida case. This is not going the right way. Let's see. One of the impacts of eutrophication in the Baltic Sea is, and this is from the satellite picture by National Geographic, of these blue-green algae that grow during the summer. So, I mean, it's really a question of reducing the amount of phosphorus that we use and other fertilizers to improve the efficiencies. We should be using less meat and dairy products. We have to recycle a lot more from these different sources from agriculture and sanitation, and we have to start using economic instruments. And finally, there's a guy called Duncan Brown. He's an Australian. He wrote this book. It's about recycling. He writes that the present way we use phosphorus is more like driving a car down the Autobahn at top speed down the highway with absolutely no idea of how much fuel we have, no fuel gauge in the dashboard, and we do nothing really until we first run out of gas, out of fuel. That's the situation with the world today. This calls for a concerted effort to develop the governance of this finite resource, to lift it into this new opportunity called the circular economy. So on that basis, I leave you with some extra reading, if you like. That's Earthshaker, IFDC's report in 2010. That's the first EU study we did. That's a Swedish study. This is a whole issue of chemosphere on it. The first attempt that the UNEP did in bringing phosphorus into policy in the UN, and they stopped then. Nothing since. Two nice books. And finally, probably the only one of its kind, it's this Swedish water. The people that actually are treating your sewage and stuff, they're writing a book about phosphorus. So, thank you.